Today's webinar is about introducing 3 power tools to new woodworkers. And when I brought that question up to my people on Instagram and Facebook, there was a lot of varying comments. Some people, a lot of the 3 selection always seem to contain a drill. And so I definitely picked the drill. Another tool I picked was the oscillating multi-tool. And lastly, the tool I think that's most handy as a power tool is a miter saw. And I would like to thank again Craftsman Tools for sponsoring the first episode. I'm very grateful. I suggested the 3 tools, and guess what? They sent me the 3 tools. It was like magic. They came to me. So I would like to begin by introducing myself and telling you just a little bit about my background. Ever since I was about 5 years old, I've been fascinated by construction and building. My grandfather owns a blacksmith shop, or he did when he was alive. He owned a blacksmith shop in Nova Scotia. And at the age of 5, I used to just mesmerize at him creating and like putting ox shoes on oxes and making cowbells and everything. And then if we fast forward to high school, it was actually, it's almost like wood found me. One of my best friends, Stephanie, I still remember this. It's a funny story. We were, she was going to sign us up for communication technology, which is photography. And I still recall, I was like, okay, you signed us up for communication technology. You remember that course code. And I don't know why I would allow something to do this for me, but she signed us up. And as we were walking to school on the first day, I turned to her and I was like, are you sure you didn't sign us up for construction technology, which is wood shop, a completely different thing altogether? And she's like, Lara, don't be, as if I would do that. And sure enough, I walked into school, and on the first day of school, I was in the wood shop. It was a difference of a letter, communication technology and construction technology, and the rest is history. I've loved woodworking my whole entire life. I went to Sheridan College and I took the furniture design program, the School of Crafts and Design program. And afterwards, eventually I got into millwork, and I was working for a millwork person making custom cabinets. And since I was right out of school, my skill level was a little bit slower. So I sped up production, and eventually I owned Her Rough Hands. So this leads us to where we are now. I put a her in the title so that people would know if I came to site, I was female. Okay, so I'm just going to deep breathe so that I can get through this, shake it out a little bit. And if you guys have any questions during this, please, I encourage you to ask Jen, and then she'll ask me a couple questions, and I hope I can field them for you. And if not, you can always go on my Instagram, Her Rough Hands, and you can ask me the questions there. I'd be happy to answer them. And likewise, Canadian Woodworking is more than qualified to answer the questions. So we're going to begin. The first tool we're going to talk about, and I'm going to break up the tools into about 10-minute sections. And I was stressing about doing this. I kept thinking, like, I made plenty of notes and I have them all scattered against my walls right now. And then I realized I don't have to be that perfect. That's not how I go. I just go with the flow. So I'm just going to, I'm going to treat this almost like a classroom. One of my best friends is a woodshop teacher, and I marvel at how he teaches students. But I was thinking, like, if I showed the chop saw, the miter saw here, am I going to be talking about a bevel cut and a compound cut and tilting the fence and everything? And I think I'm just going to slow it right down and treat everybody as if they're a first-time student and you're walking into a wood shop for the first day, and I'm your teacher, and I'm just going to give you the basics of every tool so that you, at the end of this, if I empower you in any way to pick up at least one tool and feel comfortable with it, I've done my job. I feel that so many people sometimes feel intimidated about using power tools, and they feel kind of like, I can't do that. So then they don't pick up any power tool. So my goal today is to slowly introduce a few key power tools to your arsenal, and then eventually you expand from there. You pick up these tools and you're like, oh my God, those are amazing. I'm going to pick up a couple more. And then from there, it's just like rapid fire. You just have a bunch of tools. You're like me. And as I was trying to train myself to learn how to use all these tools, I realized sometimes It's so innate to me. I just kind of pick up the tool, I use it at the top of the drill. I don't think of the gear, the settings and everything. You just innately eventually use it. So I'm gonna do my best to break it down into baby steps so that you understand all the steps that go along with each tool. And at the end of the day, safety, safety, safety is number one. And another thing that was brought to my attention when I was bringing up tools was people are like, oh, you need hearing protection, eyeglasses, a tape measure. Of course you need all this stuff. This is a given in the wood shop. But if I had a whole hour to talk about these three items, I don't think many people would stay tuned in. So I'm just going to put down the tape measure, but this is obviously super handy. If you can get one that's imperial and metric, that's fantastic. And likewise, a pair of safety glasses, if you can keep them on your head and have them handy on the tool bench, that's amazing too. Okay, so the first tool I'm going to be introducing is the drill. Like I said, when I asked this question on Instagram, a lot of people said a drill was one of their top 3 tools that they would suggest to a new woodworker. And I have to stress, I'm not going to go super complicated with any of these descriptions because I just want you to feel comfortable and at the end say, I can do this. If she can do this, I can do this. So I'm going to empower you so that you don't depend on anybody in the future. I think it's invaluable just to know that you can tell yourself, I can pick up that drill and I know how to use it. I know how to point it to that drywall. I know how to, use a stud finder to find a stud to mark it out so that you could drill in a screw to hang a picture or hang a shelf. All those little projects that you want to be doing, I want you to be able to do them and with confidence and have that shelf level. On the wall would be key. If it's tilted a little, it's okay. But if you could pick up a level and make sure that it's straight, and then you say, her rough hands encourage me to do that, then I've done my job well. So the first tool that I'm going to be talking about is the drill. And I have to mention again, if I'm talking too quickly, please tell me to slow down. I'm a little bit anxious and a little bit excited by everything. So I'm just gonna deep breathe, shake it out. I hope this is entertaining. This is going to be a full hour of your life. I need you to be entertained and happy that you attended this and that you don't feel like it's a waste of time. Okay, so the first tool that I'm going to introduce is a 12-volt battery. So there's technically a couple, like lots of types of drills out there. There's a hammer drill, a regular drill, an impact drill, ones that have cords, ones that don't have cords. So when we're talking about a cordless drill, I'm going to tell you the advantages of going corded versus cordless. So what I did, I checked out a bunch of DIY sites to figure out everybody's knowledge, and I tried to collect it into one so that I could broadcast it to you in a condensed fashion. So I'm going to tell you the comments that people said were pro cordless and pro having corded. So one good thing about having, I'm attached to my bench, I'm going to lean up. One of the good things about having a corded drill is that it's never going to die on you. That's fantastic. It's lighter weight. It's typically lighter weight than a battery pack because this has a heavy battery attached to it. It gives you a very consistent power when you're driving it in. Another point is if you're a do-it-yourselfer, sometimes you don't use this drill all the time. You pack it away, you put it away, and then you say, I'm going to get to you another day when I eventually have another project. So you have to realize that batteries eventually drain. So if you do that all the time, and when you really need the drill, you might be like, oh crap, it's out of charge. So please remember, it's so important that you charge your drills. I even, in fact, buy a couple of chargers or a couple of batteries so that when I'm charging, using the charger over here, I make sure that when you slide off the battery, like so, you pinch this little clip here, when you push it in, it's always being charged, and you see that light that's blinking, that indicates that it's newly being charged. And then after you're done, you pull it out like so, and there's little teeth that guide it in. And the very cool factor about these batteries is when you press it, you can actually see the 3 lights go on. That means it's a fully charged battery, which is fantastic. So What I was trying to say is if you're a do-it-yourselfer and you don't constantly use a drill, sometimes it's a pain and you're like, oh man, I need to charge that battery. So before, maybe the day before, you remember to take out the charger, charge your batteries, and then always have maybe one on standby. Another good trick is after you charge your battery, I always stand it upright if it's ready to go. And if you have multiple batteries, if you actually position it down, then you remember, oh, that one's got to be charged. Because back in the day, they didn't have this little feature where you could just press this button to light it up. So then you were like, is that charged? Is that not charged? I don't know. But this is the way you can tell. So there's little teeth on the bottom and you push it in and you hear it click and then it goes. And now let's talk about the features of a cordless drill. So a cordless drill, I don't know if this is a pro or con, but I'm going to comment. It costs more money. So typically, a lot of the money is in the battery. So if this drains over time, you have to buy another battery. And the pain in the butt thing is the battery often costs as much as the drill. But that being said, I was a cabinet maker that I made kitchen cabinets, custom millwork pieces for many, many years. And all I used was a cordless either drill or an impact drill. So I was not fussing over cords. I wasn't tripping on anything. I think if you talk to a lot of carpenters or woodworkers that make working kitchen cabinet shops, they would use cordless because it's just like, I can't even imagine that cord, like people tripping in a shop with multiple people, that would be a pain in the butt. So you weigh it out, you go to your local store and you try to figure out what is most beneficial to you. Cording, which is cheaper because you're not going to use it very often, or would you go cordless because you might be picking up a few more projects and you just want to kind of invest in a tool and it's got a cool feature, it has no cord. It's up to you. And a lot of retailers, like if you go to Rona or Home Depot, when you go in, there'll be lots of drills to choose from. It can actually be quite overwhelming. You could be like, oh my God, I don't know what to choose from. So a lot of them have an entry-level drill. In this case, this little guy is 12 volts. I find it very handy because it's rather lightweight, even though it has a battery pack on it. And like, I'll give you a comparison. This is my impact for 12, and look, this is 20 volt. And you can see that my muscle is flexing while I'm using this, but it's all good. It drives screws in at like a quick speed and it fastens and screws, which is fantastic. At the end of the day, a drill is meant to either bore out holes or fasten, drive in fasteners and take out fasteners. So certain projects that you could be doing with this are putting up shelves in your home, putting together furniture, taking apart furniture. If, like I said, if you want to tackle a shelf, there's lots of things you can do with a drill. So now I'm going to break down the basics of a drill. And like I said, a lot of this terminology as a woodworker, I just know innately in my mind. I don't actually kind of fuss with all of this and think, I have to do this, I have to do that. But I'm going to break it down so that you understand the basics of a drill. So the back is the motor. This is the power in the back region right here. And then as you go up, there is a gears switch here. It switches from left to right. There's 1 and 2. Some drills may have more settings, but the typical drill has gear 1 and 2. A lot of, as a new woodworker, as a new do-it-yourself person at home, most of the time, I personally would recommend that you keep it in gear 1 on the top, right there, gear 1, because that's going to give you power, but it's not going to, but control at the same time. It's not overly fast, and it's not going to scare you. And I know I'm kind of jumping from topic to topic, but another thing is when you're holding the trigger here, when you have the setting on, you almost kind of, there's a trigger that has multiple speeds, so you can slow it down or speed it up depending on how much you pinch. Okay, and the next gear is number 2. So you would use 2 because it picks up more speed. If you were doing something like a brick wall, something that needs a little bit more vigor, you would use that. Or if you were drilling paint, and you had to mix it around, and it had to have a high speed. You would make sure that the sediments in the bottom were lifting up. So you would use the proper accessory, put it in, and it keeps going in and out of the bucket. The next feature on the drill, I just have to remember, breathe. Okay, I'm going to breathe. And like I said, if I'm going too fast at any time, please let me know, and please be gentle. This is my first webinar. I just want to make sure I empower you with knowledge. Public speaking is not one of my favorite things to do, even though I love to talk in the real world. But the reason I'm doing it is because I love tools, and that's why I'm doing it. I love them. Okay, so the next feature on it is the clutch. The clutch is here. So you move the dial, the setting dial. The clutch increases the torque, which in essence increases the power. So you move it left and right. This particular one has 15 settings, so 1 to 15. 1 being you're driving in a screw with not a lot of force, so it might not actually fully go in. And then the middle setting, let's say roughly 5 to 7, is driving in the screw probably flush, like the right amount, so not too deep and not too shallow, just the right amount. And as you pick it up, you're getting a little bit more aggressive. So you just have to make sure as a new woodworker, you know what you're doing. Maybe you start on a scrap piece, and in this case, I have a red Robbie, and I use my drill bit, and I'll put it on setting 1. And you can see, I'll attach that to my bit here. And if I drive it in, this is a soft wood, so I'm not countersinking first. So when you drive it in, you see it's making that noise. There's not enough pressure. Like, keep going, it's going to make that noise over and over again. So then you pick it up and you're like, oh, maybe I'll speed it up to 7. And 7 may or may not be enough. And again, it was almost enough, but it's still, you can see it's still a little proud of my surface. So I'm going to crank it up to, let's go 9. Let's not go crazy because there's just a little bit more that we have to conquer. No, we could probably do more. So I'm just going to crank it to 13. And perfect. That's perfect. It's right. If you were doing a cabinet, you would probably use a countersink bit. Truthfully first, a countersink bit bores out the material first to prevent it from splitting. But since this is a soft wood, picture it being like a deck plank, and I'm just driving in screws. Unless you're a perfectionist, some people might do this. You might countersink all your deck screw holes first. I'm going to gather, like I've done decks, and most of the time you just bore them in and you fasten them in and you use the right amount of torque and then you drive them in, but you don't want to get them too deep because that's going to make you look like a hat. We don't want it to look like you've dived in all your screws way too deep and then sometimes it splits the wood. It's not a good look. So we don't do that. And then this last part of the drill, oh, one more thing. There is a setting where it's a drill bit. Typically on the top there, it looks like a drill. Typically on some drills, there's a drill bit and a hammer. So a drill bit is kind of like most of your screwing. Most of the time you'll set it in drill 1 so that you can do most of your activities where you're drilling in, you're taking out. And then if it was set on the hammer, it acts almost like a hammer where it's vibrating and it's being more aggressive in getting it in. This little tool here doesn't have a hammer sitting. So I gather this would be more at the level of a do-it-yourselfer. So you're not doing anything aggressive with it. And the last thing to take note of is the clutch. The clutch, or no, chuck. The chuck, my bad. The chuck is the front part here. You loosen it up with your hand and you can take out the drill bit. See how that is? And then when I tighten it, the teeth go tight. So I loosen it up, counterclockwise loosens it up and counterclockwise tightens it. So, and then what I do is you kind of put the bit in, and it could be a small bit, it can be whatever, but in this case, it's a red Robbie. You put it in and you want to make it just a little bit out, like a little bit bigger so it can slide in and out. You slide it in, you tighten it up with your hand, and sometimes you just make it a little shallow from the back. And sometimes if you push it right to the back, it actually over time with the friction loosens the bit forward. So that's never a good thing. So when you do that, you'll hear a little click at the end, and that means you did a good job. But when you loosen it, And you're like, oh, maybe if it was a longer bit, sometimes you're like, did I put that in straight? So you can loosen it up just ever so lightly, wobble it around just to make sure it's good. And I cheat, and a lot of people do cheat. You kind of move your hand and just with a, maybe I put that on setting when, so it doesn't burn my hand next. But you can close it up, and then that, that's in there tight, and you hear the little click at the end. I'm trying to think if oh, another thing to show you guys, and I'm going to wrap up this soon because there's 2 other tools to get through. Another thing to show you guys is a multi-tool bit case. So this is all like, if you get one of these from the major building stores, Home Depot, Rona, all those stores, it will have all the accessories in there, drill bits. And when you're drilling, there's different types of bits, like one's for wood, one's for masonry, one's for wood, masonry, metal. And when you're doing metal, you just have to make sure you pick the right bit. Generally, some cases even indicate that's a metal bit, that's a masonry bit, those are wood. So it's all kind of determined by the point, because point of the little, if the drill bit you pull out, this point determines how it's going to interact with the wood. So if it's more of there's different points. There's dull points, more sharp points. There's lots of points to choose from. But if you're doing metal and you want to tackle the drill while doing it, you put it on a super slow speed and add a bit of oil, so that you never want the drill to heat up, because heating up the drill and the bit, that's the #1 way to dull a bit. If you heat it up, it's going to destroy it. So just don't do that. And one last thing to take note, these cases that have like sockets in here, every type of bit known to man, it's fantastic to have, but sometimes they're not of the greatest quality. So sometimes it's just like they die fast over time. So if you realize there's a couple particular bits you're using a lot, maybe invest in better ones. I think that's pretty much everything. Jen, is there any questions? And please let me know if I'm talking too fast. I would appreciate.
You have done so great that there's no questions about the drill at this point. There is one question, but I'll save it till the end because it's more of a generic question, and you can keep on going.
Okay, perfect. All right, guys, we're just going to keep going, and I'm going to shake up the nerves some more. Like I said, I hated presentations as a little girl, so this is so fearful of my wheelhouse, but because I love tools, I can bring my joy and love of tools to the game. I have a friend in the garage here, and he's telling me to speed up, so I'm just going to ignore that and say, I've got this, okay? We've got this, we've got this. Okay. Tool number 2 is the oscillating multi-tool. This is a fantastic tool. One could say it's the jack of all trades. It does so much. I just love this tool. Like, there's different heads. It's all about the different heads, that the accessories that you can get on and off. So sometimes, this is the head. You pull down this trigger right here, this lever. And personally, I lean into it and I yank it off like so. And then you can put it on like so, and you hear that click at the end. That means you did a good job. So different things, the definition of an oscillating tool is that it vibrates. There's a motion back and forth, it oscillates. And so with a little bit of motion, you kind of just plunge the accessory. If it's more like a wood plunging bit like this, you plunge it into the material, and it can get into tight spaces. It can just do so much. It can do fine cuts, it can do rough cuts, depending on the teeth of your blade. So you have to be mindful of that. Likewise, you know how the drill has accessory packs, these have accessory packs. So when you get an accessory pack, you'll have things like this kind of more narrow piece, this accessory right here. And it's great for wood. There's even a marking gauge on it. If you look, I don't know if you can see that, but so a marking gauge on it. Sometimes it has metric on one side and imperial on the other side. So centimeters on one side and inches on the other side. So you know when you're digging into the material, you're not going so deep. Over time, as you use them, to be honest, a lot of those measurements wear off. So you could do it the old-fashioned way of putting masking tape on there. So you know when you're plunging into the wall, if you don't want to hit a 2x4, just make it the thickness of a drywall, which is typically about 1/2 inch thick. So you go in 1/2 inch, you mark out 1/2 inch, and maybe you want to go slightly more than 1/2 inch, but who knows? But then you just score the 2x4 behind it. Another thing to take note of, when you're actually plunging this into a wall, you have to make sure that you're very aware of electrical behind the wall, or any pipes behind the wall. So if it's above an outlet and it's directly above, you might want to go, oh, slow down a little bit. You get a detector that actually tells you if there's pipes in the way or electrical in the way. So that's fantastic. And this tool, again, has a little battery pack. So if it's fully charged, guess what? The lights went on. It's fantastic. And so because this, you might be using this a lot on site, sometimes you want to make sure that like you have that backup battery on standby. It's never a bad idea. So this is, like I said, I watched a lot of DIY videos before I made this webinar for you guys. And one of the hacks that I heard from, like, you know, different tradespeople, I thought this one was genius. So there are different standing grits that come with the multi-tool in a lot of the cases. This grit, the sandpaper here came in like 80 grit, which has a hook and loop on the back. So this, like, it goes on almost like Velcro and it peels right off, which is fantastic. So you want to start with a more coarse grit. So the coarser the grit, the lower the number. So if it's 60 grit, it's very coarse. If it's 80, it's pretty coarse still. And then as it moves up, 120 is medium grit. And then let's say you get into a finer grit, 240. So some things that you might be using, oh, I forgot to tell you the hack. Okay, my bad. So I thought this was genius. So when all these, instead of running out to buy these accessory packs, which might cost a lot of money, you sometimes have an orbital sander that you will have worn out the edges of, right? So what you can do is Velcro that on and actually like cut around the back to make this a triangle shape and use these old pads. Look at that. Look at that. It's fantastic. And that's sometimes the center of the orbital sandpaper doesn't get used a lot. I thought that was genius. So you pull it off and it goes through all the grits. And I find what oscillating multi-tool is fantastic to do is it get into nooks and crannies, like small spaces. It's fantastic. And there's a little light. So when I turn it on, there is a light at the top. So if you're, I'll turn that off so you can actually hear me. The light is handy because sometimes you're in a tight area where it's dark and you're like, I can't see the exact cut I'm trying to do. So when you have that little light on, it guides you through. You're like, oh, there's the light at the end of the tunnel. Go get it. And then you're either using the wooden bit to score it. And likewise, if you're standing in a staircase area, maybe there's not a lot of light on, that's fantastic. Different things you could be using the sander for is stripping down furniture. So sometimes if you're going in between spindles of the chair, the back spindles, you want to get into nooks. Honestly, I'd probably use an orbital on majority of the surface because this is a very small surface, but getting into the hard to reach nooks, this is a game changer. And likewise, if you're doing a staircase, it's fantastic to get into the hard to reach corners of those areas because the stairs are already installed, but sometimes you've got to sand them back to ground zero so that you can go through all the grits, rough, smooth, fine, and then stain it up, paraffin, and this will be a fantastic tool to have. Another thing to take note of is you want to always use the oscillating multi-tool with two hands, one to kind of steady yourself, because unlike other kind of cutting tools, jigsaws, they rest on the surface, whereas this one, you're holding the back weight of the battery so that you keep it level. You want to just, in one case, you want to score the material, and sometimes you eventually plunge it in, but a trick is you score the outside of the material first, and then eventually you score it a little bit deeper and then plunge it in. So I would take this bit out, and there's different accessory bits. See how this is a wider bit? So a wider bit is more handy because sometimes you're cutting through drywall and you have like a 10-inch line, so you're scoring it, and the wider, this will give you a little bit better accuracy as you're scoring down it. Whereas if this is more of a narrow bit, It's for a small area, like just say in this case, yeah, I'll show you in a second. See these electrical boxes right here? These measure, I want to say roughly, don't quote me on this, like 2 and a bit by 3 and a bit inches. And I drew one out over here. And so I'm going to use the tool. I'm going to wish me luck. I'm a little shaky right now because I'm a little nervous. So just bear with me with my hands. I'm just going to slide this baby on. Oh, yeah. Fantastic. Just took a little bit of extra power. And in every single case, you want to be using your safety glasses and your hearing protection. And even if you have a mask in some cases, because when I'm cutting away drywall or different materials, I might be breathing in stuff. That's not so good for me. So if you have a mask, I'm not going to wear a mask because you won't be able to hear me through this seminar. But I'm going to put on my trusted glasses, which technically I should have had on when I was using the drill. Always use eye protection, hearing protection, all of that is fantastic. So I'm going to put on the glasses. They're a little bit dusty, so bear with me. I'm going to clean them out a little bit. Put them on like so. Deep breathe again and put on my earmuffs for hearing protection. Unsnap. And then one other thing to take note of, there are different speeds on on an oscillating multi-tool. It varies from 1 to 6 in this case. So 1 would be a very low vibration. And then as you go up higher, 6 is a higher vibration. As a new beginner, you might want to try this on a sample piece of wood because you'd want to start at a lower speed so it's not causing it's not scary. But eventually you do want to build up the speed because an oscillating tool performs the best when you have it at a higher speed. So the next step we're going to do is I have it drawn out, this receptacle box right over here. And I'm going to score it. Like I said, I might be a bit nervous. It's all good. So I'm going to score it, okay? I'm going to turn on my tool and you get the idea. So I gently scored the edge. And sometimes some people even put down guys so it steadies their hand. I'm sorry, I'm not even in view right now. My bad, guys. It was just my random ghost hands. Okay, so sometimes you want to make sure you go in with ease and then you plunge it in and you want to make sure that you're going right to the back. And like I said, just say for some reason there's something you don't want to hit at the back, I would either make sure I check the marking gauge, but sometimes when all that dust is kicking up, it's actually hard to see that marking gauge. So sometimes you put a little piece of tape on there that reads, it's louder to read, like you can see, okay, I'm hitting the tape, now bring it back. So you put it in, and when you put the receptacle box in, and whenever you're putting down a tool, you want to put it in like so that it doesn't fall anywhere. So I always make sure I lay down tools so that if you keep them upright, if somebody tips it, not fun. Here's the receptacle box. This is one I did yesterday. So you pop it in, and one thing you have to take note of, there's little notches in the electrical box. I'm sorry, I'm not even on screen right now. There's little notches. So you notch them out right here. That's fine, that's fine. You notch them out right here. And then you can pop this baby in like so. You pop it in like so, and the rest is history, and you screw it in. That's fantastic. Another little trick that you can do is if you're taking off old casing of a door frame, you put a little piece of wood in the back or plastic or something so it doesn't score your wall, and you can put the tool on and you can score the back and you can drive it down, but you never want to score the drywall because that means a lot of like paste filler afterwards, and that ain't fun. So try not to do that. So the piece of cardboard will only last for so long. So if you had something a little bit more like a piece of plastic, that would be a lot more handy. All right. So I'm trying to think if Let me just think about it. With the fame saw, a couple of projects, I'll take off my earmuffs because I'm probably starting to get really loud and aggressive at you guys. And you're like, okay, she's really loud at this point. So some projects you can tackle with the oscillating multi-tool are if you have a scraper, your garage, like you have like glue bits on your garage, there's a scraper accessory, so you scrape off the old glue. And sometimes another hack that I heard was sometimes if you don't have a scraper, sometimes you can use an old wood accessory bit, and then you file it down, and then you can actually bring it down to ground zero, and then use a file and sharpen the edge, and you could maybe get another life out of it. I don't know if it's going to work great. I heard about it. I didn't personally do it, but I think it sounded great to save the environment. As we go through the accessories, you can also take off old caulking with these different accessories. Some of them have like it's more of a round head. I don't actually have that, but there's one that looks like a little shell, and that's great for, like I said, wider lines so that it keeps more of an accurate guide going down. Overall, it's a fantastic tool, and I think that that's fantastic to have in your arsenal too. So I think that's basically the only question. That's about it on the oscillating multi-tool. And Jen, is there any questions?
Yes, we do have some questions.
Question.
We have one question. Would you not prefer an orbital round sander for larger furniture products?
100%, yes, 110 million%. When it comes to one of my first tools that I got was an orbital sander. You can even get like inexpensive orbital sanders. You definitely don't want to tackle a project with, in my mind, a block of wood and the old-fashioned way of a block of wood and putting a piece of sandpaper rolled over it. Orbital sander is a must. But if you literally only took my advice and bought 3 tools, you would be stuck with this baby or the old-fashioned way of sanding with an old school block. But I 100% agree with that person that an orbital sander is a great investment. One thing to take note of with an orbital sander, though, is depending on, make sure you sand through all the multiple grits, because after you stain, you'll actually see little scratch marks, almost little swirl lines that can happen. And you only find that out after you stain, and you're like, oh, that's why you're supposed to go through all the bits. So if you have an orbital, please do your best to invest in some good sandpaper and go through all the grits. It's important to go from 80. You can cheat, go to like, let's say 80, 120, 180, 150 I would have liked, but 180 and then so on. You don't necessarily have to go super high in the grits in that case, because that means that the stain is lighter, like it's not going to penetrate the surface so much. But I hope I answered that question.
Perfect. Okay. So the same person asked, would this tool be better for construction use?
Just so many things you can do. Another one that I forgot to point out is you can even cut tiles. So like if you had to cut tiles, if you were doing your own bathroom project or backsplash, let's say a backsplash, let's start modest and smaller. If you're cutting it and you had little cuts to make at the end cut of the wall, and you had to cut that, make the tile a little bit shorter, it's fantastic to have. Yes, a tile cutter, like a table saw tile cutter would be fantastic too, but we got to remember we're on a budget and we don't have that many tools. So yeah, cutting tools and removing grout, there's so many things. If you actually read up on a multi-tool, I'm not doing it justice. It has so many features that I would tell you to watch read up about it, watch the videos online, and you'll see so many things it can do.
Perfect. Thank you. And we do have resources that we will share after the webinar. So we will get to some of that. One more question and then we'll move along just for time's sake. How much would you use this tool in your boards? Does it help with details?
In my boards, help me out, like my charcuterie boards?
I'm not 100% sure, but
yeah, because if it's somebody that actually follows my page, that would be probably the question.
Okay.
So I do make a lot of charcuterie boards. In that case, yeah, you could use it. You could use it. There's an accessory. I would probably prefer this accessory on the grill, to be honest. Here it is. This little bad boy. You can add. You see, it has like it's sandpaper on it. technically I probably would have put it in the drill and I forgot to demonstrate this one, but there are like areas, let's say this piece right here. Can you see this piece? I'm going to bring it down. You see there's like a heart back there. And by the way, go Canada. There's a heart back there. And so with an accessory, sometimes with maybe the sandy bit on there, you can get into the nooks and crannies like that. It's not overly, like not something I would always use on my charcuterie boards, but it's more, I do a lot of home projects, DIYs in my home. So it'd be more used in that application. But I forgot to use this little sander, I want to mention, on the drill. It will go into nooks and crannies. And it will like go into all these crannies. It's fantastic. Look at that. Yeah, it's fantastic. Okay, I hope I answered that, but yes, with charcuterie boards, you don't use the multi-tool too much, but in general, it's fantastic to have.
Perfect. Okay, for time's sake, we'll move along. We're at 8:40 or sorry, 7:42. So I'll let you continue.
Tackle the last one, Jen. Okay. So like I said, you always want to make sure that you place the tools down, and preferably you want to make sure that you have a clean workspace. Mine's a little bit messy. Don't judge me. I just wanted to make sure I have everything out for you guys. Okay, so I'm going to put all my drills aside because we're not using them anymore. So my next thing that I'm going to introduce is the miter saw here. So there's different types of miter saws. I'd like to call this a little cutie. It's 7¼ inch diameter blade. It's so cute and lightweight. So in the past, I've had to go to site and I've had to lift like the 10-inch to 14-inch miter saws. They're ridiculous. They're so heavy. One of my first jobs when I was like early 20s, my boss would say, "Oh, can you carry that, that 12-inch miter saw down the stairs?" And I'm like, ah, crap, okay. But if this was invented for like the smaller projects of doing trim on site, doing different things that like quarter round on site, this is fantastic. Little picture frames, I love it. And the other amazing feature that this particular saw has, and I thought this was a game changer, this is why I said, I want this one. It has a battery pack off the back. It's a 20 volt, but look, it comes off. So there's no cords on this guy. There's no cords. It's fantastic. I love it so much. I cannot stress how fantastic it is. And like I said, pop that on and then power. So when we're dealing with a miter saw, there's so many technical terms that we could use, but remember, I'm pretending to be, let's say, the high school teacher, and I'm teaching students on the first day. There, I could be expressing, like talking to you about bevel cuts and compound miter cuts. But what I'm going to break down is the basics of a chop saw, so that after, when we're done, you can say, I can do that. But first, please read the manual because it's so important to be safe. Please, please, please read the manual. So when you're cutting, in this case, a piece of baseboard, there's a couple ways of cutting. You could cut it flat, but if you can actually keep it upright, if your fence is high enough, it's handy to do that because it dulls the blade less. It's less pressure on the blade. But if I'm actually just making a cut like this, I just go down. But if I'm doing a 45-degree cut for baseboard at the end, then I can just use my gauge at the bottom here, my angle gauge, and move it side to side to a 45-degree cut as opposed to tilting it. I think I would prefer that. And when you're actually making the cut, you put on your glasses. Yeah, you put on your glasses. You have to make sure there's enough clearance. And in this case, it's a sliding fence, so it's going to come back. So I'm going to pinch the material and keep my hand far enough away from the blade. And then so in some cases, there's not enough clearance for this. It's all good. There is, like I said, you can always bring the chop saw to the front, loosen this part right here where it's just the angles, and then you loosen this piece back here. And you can tilt this one way. This is a single tilt miter saw, so that means it tilts in one direction. Some of the bigger miter saw tilt in both directions. That's a compound tilt. It can tilt this way and tilt this way. in this regards, it's okay to have a single tilt because you just recognize the material, you flip it over, you figure out which direction, or put it on this side of the fence, put it on this side of the fence, you'll make it work. And likewise, you just loosen this up, lefty loosey, righty tighty, and then it stops. This is handy because sometimes it tilts both ways. You have to see, kind of feel where it hits the ground, like part 0, like to do a straight cut. So you do that, you put that in. And when you're actually cutting material, you if you can get majority of the surface down, that never hurts. So you would put it down, you would wear, yeah, again, hearing protection and eye protection. You always want to make sure that the material is against the fence. You don't want it to be like, even like a middle gap, because it could fly, the material could fly. You do not want it to fly. So you make sure to put enough pressure down and yeah, do the cut and rest the back of the piece of the material against the fence. Make sure it's rested against the fence. Too bad this video, like, it's not great on angles, but there's, oh, I think you can see it. There's this little guy right here. It can be lifted up and it's like, almost like it's a clamp. So you can clamp down the material. So if you're a little bit nervous, you would clamp it down, hold it down, and that can hold the material safe from flying off your table. But also take note that if you use your hands, there's little hands on the miter saw, and you keep your hands as far away from the chop saw, the blade, as possible, because when you pull down, you can see how the guard lifts up, and then the material goes down. So another thing to take note of is that the blade is 1/8 of an inch thick. So you have to take note of that curved line, because when you're cutting a piece of material, say you have a 10-inch piece and you're trying to get 2 5-inch pieces out of it, if you cut it directly in the center, it would be just shy, like a 16th shy of 5 inches if it was dead center. So you want to make sure that the material in that case is 10 inches and 1/8, because you want to trim it and then have enough space where you put down a stopper, push over the piece, and basically have no material offcuts. Another thing to take note of is if you have raw lumber from, Home Depot or so on, at the end of any board, these pieces at the end of the boards, they're not often straight. So you always want to take off a little bit of material to ensure that you have a 90-degree angle. And there's so many things that you can do with a miter saw, is that you can make picture frames. If it's smaller scale like this, you can cut trim work, you can make boxes. Even this has a very cool setting where it has like a little gauge where you can allow the blade to be set down ever so, like right here, there's a little adjuster, and you can adjust it so that the blade doesn't fully go into the table here. So it's whatever above the surface you make it with the dial. So if you were making like a mortise and tenon, like a groove that you were sitting, here's a piece of material and slotting another one in, that could be done on this little cutie. I love this saw. I think it's amazing. And I love it because for any DIY person, it's small and compact, so it's light enough. If we unscrew this, I can actually lift it up. I was actually lifting it up, doing some exercises, and I could lift it up and it wasn't hurting my back. It was fantastic. So I definitely recommend it if you're doing smaller projects. And then eventually with time, you can graduate and have that large 12-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch, 14-inch miter saw. A feature I do love, and on some videos when I was watching the DIY videos, people are saying it doesn't need a sliding saw. I personally like a sliding saw because it allows you to pull it out and then push into the material and go back. And if you're a little intimidated, sometimes you can score just a few times. But whatever you're doing, you go from front to the back. So you're pulling in the material and it gives you a cleaner cut. And after you cut, you want to make sure, after I do a cut, you want to make sure the blade completely stops before you pull away the material, and it allows for a cleaner line on a piece of material too. There's different settings on a miter saw. There's 0 degrees, that gives you a 90 cut. That's probably one of the most common. There's 45 degrees, so you can use that for baseboards, making a picture frame. There's a 22.5 degree, that's somewhat common. If you were doing something curved, like going around a curve, you would use that multiple times. And yeah. So I'm trying to think of other features. And like I said, having the battery is a game changer. it might die on site. I'm gonna find out. I was using this all week and I found no trouble whatsoever with it. So I was doing a lot of projects because it's a larger battery, a 20-volt battery. It maintains its life quite a bit. So I think it's a game changer in the industry. So I'm trying to think if there's any other questions. And I will do one single cut just so you can kind of appreciate how to make a cut. Like I said, put on the material. Putting on my safety earmuffs. Safety earmuffs don't always want to agree. Okay, so I'm going to cut a piece of material. And I'm going to cut about 4 inches off. So you grab a tape measure and you mark it with a pencil. And when I mark it with a pencil, I'm going to cut off, let's say, 1.5 inches. So when I put down my blade, I want the good side to be on, let's say, the side I'm holding. So when I put down this blade, I'm going to visually see that the blade is going to contact where the line is. And then I'm going to slowly bring it down and just slow speed. Be calm while you're doing this. Don't be excited. You can tackle it. It's loud. And that's sometimes what the biggest intimidation of a machine is. It's loudness. So if you could just wear your earmuffs, it makes it more like you can tackle it. Okay, so I'm just going to score it. Until it stops, it stopped. Then you pull it out, you pull the piece of material safely away, and that's it. Nice clean cut. Voila. I think I'm running out of time. So I'm going to ask Jen if there's any other questions, and please let me know.
All right, perfect. I think you've done such a great job. It's been very informative for everyone. I think there's a few questions. I just have to find them. They're in the chat. One question, would you prefer a 10-inch or a 12-inch?
If you stop, then I would say the bigger the better. So I would say a 12-inch would be fantastic. I had a 12-inch in my own shop. So if you're doing something like crown molding and everything, you need a lot of clearance. I would probably lean towards a bigger saw if you had a large shop. But in a do-it-yourself environment, for beginning woodworkers, I would think that would be very intimidating. It's heavy, it's clunky to carry it around. It takes up a lot of garage space. So I would lean towards 10-inch for a do-it-yourselfer, but if you had a larger wood shop one day, which I hope you do, then I would upgrade to a larger chop saw too.
Okay, perfect. This is a question going back to sanders. What type of sander is best for larger projects?
I would still say orbital. Like there's belt sanders out there, and but if you're trying to keep a level surface, like belt sanders are very hard to control. If you do a belt sander and you have aggressive grit on it, it's a hit or miss. Like if you dig down too deep in some areas, you're going to cause craters like dishes, whereas an orbital sander, you're not going to get too much into trouble. So I would lean towards an orbital and just be patient. Yes, an orbital over a flame saw, yes, but that would allow us to have 4 new tools in your arsenal. If we can introduce a 4th tool, I would put an orbital sander in the mix.
Maybe another webinar for sure.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, and I think there was one, a generic question here. How much should somebody expect to budget for their first set of power tools?
Sky's the limit, man. So it all depends on the brand you want to conquer. I'm going to say, I'm being modest here. Yeah, I would say 500 would be like an entry level starting price plus tax. And that's Canadian tax, that's 13%. And 500, sometimes you're getting a smaller drill and sometimes you're getting a low basic feature on a chop saw. And maybe you wait for that sale, but the more you can kind of set aside, the better. But that being said, maybe introduce yourself to one saw, like treat yourself to one product here, because maybe your budget's 200 and you're like, I can't wait till, I don't have time to wait to get to 500. Maybe ask friends if they who some of their tools to start out with. Lots of people are very kind out in the world. That's my suggestion. But I would say minimum 500.
Perfect. All right, so I think that's it, unless anyone wants to quickly add a question in the Q&A box or in the chat, but I think that's it. We did well for timing, and just while we're wrapping up, I will let everyone know that we will be sending out a quick survey. So we do appreciate any and all feedback. We'd love to hear from you. We're so happy that you were all here to join us tonight and to support Lara in her very first woodworking webinar. She did a great job, and we do hope that you will be back to join us on October 17th. She will be doing her next webinar on measuring and marking tips for beginners. We also have our editor, Rob Brown, will be hosting a webinar next week, October 2nd, on sanding. So if that's something you're interested in, the same link that you use to register here has all the information on upcoming webinars. So you should be able to find that. And I did put the link in the chat as well if you're looking for any other info. We will be sending some resources out to you so that everyone can hopefully find what they're looking for. And I think that's it. I don't see any other comments, just lots of, oh wait, no, sorry, I do. I see one more question real quick. Do you have a favorite brand of power tools?
I'm biased today. Craftsman tools, they are number one. But yeah, Craftsman tools, all these tools have been fantastic, but they also carry DeWalt, and I find DeWalt's an amazing tool. But whatever tool you end up getting, it will be a game changer. You'll love it. And one little quick thing, I just wanted to thank so many people. I asked everybody to join this webinar, and I was so scared it wouldn't go well. So thank you so much for all my friends and people on Instagram and Facebook for joining me. That meant a lot. And your support is it meant very much a big deal to me. Thank you so much.